In 8.2, we're going to talk about banks and a little bit about their T accounts and what happens if people deposit money and the money multiplier. So just kind of a refresher, what is an asset, a liability, and what's equity? This is going to help us to define a balance sheet. An asset is something of value. And so we could say a financial asset or we could say a fixed asset, right? In terms of something like a tangible asset is another way to think about it. So there's things of value. And then you have liabilities. So this is sometimes, before I go on, assets are something you own. Liabilities is something you owe. It's a debt of some kind. So it could be basically something that you owe to someone else, right? Now, equity is assets minus liabilities. And so sometimes we call equity net worth if we're talking about, say, an individual or a household of some kind. Now we've got a balance sheet here that looks at the balance sheet of the Bank of Clayton. We could do a balance sheet for a household, like so my assets for Daniel Glossinger would be like bank account money, and I own a car, and I have a house that's in my name. And then I have liabilities on the other side. I have a little bit of debt on one of my cars, and I have a little bit of debt on my house. But aside from that, right, then we're left with my net worth. And so kind of the way to think about this is to say that at the end of the day, you have assets minus liabilities, and it gives you equity or net worth. Now, for this bank's perspective, we're going to use the word equity. And if we added up 150 and then another 100, that's 250. And then we can see here that there's 200 in liabilities, and so the equity is 50. And in this reserves part, you can see that we've broken out the two types of reserves. So now we're going to answer some questions about this. What's the bank's required reserve ratio? So the reserve ratio is, reserve ratio is the percentage of demand deposits, checking accounts, that the bank has to hold. And so we look at it and we find what's the required reserves divided by the demand deposits. And so for this, it would be 20 divided by 100, so 20%, or you could say 0.2, right? Either one would be acceptable. Not including its current loans. How much more in loans can the bank make? Well, they can't loan out money they've already loaned out, right? That's an important thing. Students often misread that, but they can loan out any excess reserves. So the answer here is just 30 because it's the excess reserves. And then the money multiplier is used to calculate maximum changes in money supplies. And how do we calculate it? Well, it's 1 divided by the reserve ratio. So in this case, right, so we'll just say MM is equal to that. So it would be 1 divided by 0.2, so it's equal to 5 for this bank. Okay. And now we're going to use that money multiplier to look at what if Fung deposits $50 cash into her checking account. So how much did the money supply change initially? None, because money was already there. It was in the money supply. And then how much could the bank loan of that $50? Well, of the $50, they can loan out 80%, right? They're required to keep 20%. So 80% would be 40. It's 80% of the 50. And now we use the money multiplier to figure out what's the maximum change in the money supply as a result if they were to loan out this money, right? And if everybody were to loan out every dollar that they could and everybody redeposited the full amount, then we could get 40 times 5, which is $200. Now, this is actually the same amount as the maximum change in the loans in the system, because we'd think about what's the initial change in loans times 5. And that's the amount of new money that gets created. So hopefully this helps you with bank balance sheets. See you next time.